Right, so the Nikon ZF. I know there's been a lot of interest in this camera, but what I wanted to see was if this is actually a good camera regardless of the retro styling. We all know it's got those dials, the old school dials on top for the ISO and the shutter speed. So as you can see, I've added the small rig grip to the camera. And the reason I've done that is because the issue now is that the lenses are much bigger and heavier. So like a 51.2 is now massive and heavy and weighs a kilogram, like over 2 pounds. I really recommend the small rig grip in particular. The rubber on it is really sticky, so it's easy to grip and hold on to, and it does transform the ergonomics of the camera. Now, you might be different, but what I find with these retro cameras is I love the look of them, but I don't like using the dials, and this sounds like a contradiction. The way I set up the camera is I switch the record button on the top plate over to being my ISO button. So for ISO, I would just press this and turn the dial on the back, turn the front dial on the camera, and you're switching auto ISO on and off like that. Now let's get into the portrait shoot outdoors with the 51.2. This was a last minute organised shoot in an area of London where I was doing some other photography work at the time. I grabbed this shoot with Ellie. It was very cold. Both of us were just recovering from having colds at different times, which didn't help, and the lighting was very difficult. But I thought this is the perfect time to do something like this and test this camera out. So what you're going to see in the pictures here is less than ideal lighting. But one of the reasons I like doing shoots like this is because using that available lighting, not adding any flash, not adding any LED lights or anything like that, it means you get this kind of very raw and non-deliberate look, which has got its own vibe about it as well. And I really like that. All of these pictures are going to be shot at f1.2, which is really tricky when you think about it for a camera to focus. But not only that, the ISO range on most of these shots is between 3,200 and 8,000. That's really high, and I think a lot of DSLRs would struggle to focus on a moving subject and track it in these conditions, let alone eye tracking. So what I want to see was what the hit rate was like. How would this camera perform in these conditions, some of the hardest conditions I can throw at a camera, tracking an eyeball in incredibly dark conditions. Now I have a couple of comments to make on the focus system that are negative, but I have to tell you, the focus system on this camera is outrageously good. I would highly recommend what this camera can do. You will not be disappointed. This is so hard for a camera to do. And the Nikon Z9 and Z8 are better than the ZF, that's true, but you will not be disappointed with the hit rate on this. It is really, really good. I don't think any camera's going to hit it all the time in these kind of conditions. It's just not realistic. And you've probably seen some people comment on this, and this is the eyelash focus rather than eyeball or the iris. It seems that at certain angles, the camera will go for the eyelashes instead of the iris, which is a bit of a problem. And I think that they need to rejig the algorithms for this. That actually makes me think there is one other small problem as well. Now, I know as I'm stating these, you might think, you're sort of like going back on what you said about the autofocus system. It is really, really good, and it's right up there. And the autofocus issues that I had in this shoot didn't cause me any problems as such. I think that there's a sort of thing with the eyelash focus where people say, well, if you're that close, then you shouldn't be using the camera at f1.2. And I don't think that that's a valid excuse, because whether you like that style or not, other people might. And even if that means that you're getting sort of noses out of focus slightly, it's a look. Like, you might not like it, but it's a look. And the camera is supposed to focus on the eye, not the eyelashes. It doesn't happen often, but it happens. And it will happen sometimes within a shoot if you're shooting wide open. It's a Nikon problem, and they need to address that at some point. It would not put me off buying this camera or this lens. I don't see the problem because it's so rare, and even when it does it, you're not going to notice it most of the time unless you zoom in. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's really much of an issue, but I think Nikon should still fix it, because it's not supposed to do that. Simple as that. But don't let that put you off buying this. Excellent, that's really good. Good one. I think a lot of these problems are going to be firmware update fixes. I just want to mention them, and if you're like a Nikon fanboy and that upsets you, get over it. There's more things to worry about than that. We need to be honest about how cameras perform, and I hope you appreciate me giving you accurate feedback on this stuff. And when it comes to the ISO performance, ISO is outstanding. A lot of the cameras that are on the modern ones now at this 24 megapixel kind of range are all incredible, and this is right up there with them. You will not need to use sort of denoise software with this camera. I think you can just forget about that. The ISO performance is excellent. I used it in this shoot up to ISO 8000. 8000 was easy for it, like easy. Battery life has been actually quite good. I was surprised. I thought the battery life on these cameras was going to be worse, but I've used Nikon for my professional work for ages, and I'm just in this habit because the on-off switch is on the shutter button. Whenever I'm not taking a picture, my finger automatically flicks the camera to the off position. I don't even think about it anymore. It's just an automatic action, and then as soon as I'm picking up the camera, I switch it on. And this comes on incredibly quickly. The dynamic range on this camera is standard, what you'd expect. It's very good. There's really nothing to say. One thing some people asked about was 24 megapixels. Is that enough? Only you can decide that. I think 24 megapixels is enough for most people. If you're cropping heavily or you know that you need more than that, then you probably already know that. And you're probably not looking at this camera in the first place. But if you're shooting portraits, weddings, probably most landscape photographers as well, you're probably going to be fine with 24 megapixels. So the issue you're going to have with this camera is just the handling with the larger lenses on it. It's not really designed and ergonomically built to have the weight of some of these modern lenses on this kind of a camera. My preference probably would be to just wait for the Z6 III or go in on the Z8 if you can afford that. And overall, that's my feeling on the camera for professional work. If you're not a professional and you're looking for a camera and you think that you're going to enjoy the retro styling, which I really liked, it does make you want to pick the camera up. There's something about that styling that just does that. You are going to get that from this camera. What you need to take into account is Nikon doesn't have many lenses that suit this camera body. And so if you're into the retro styling and that's your number one thing that you want, I would probably recommend that you go with Fuji, because Fuji is going to give you that and they've got the lenses to match. However, if you're on the Nikon system already and you've got Z8, Z9 and you really want something like this because you like the styling and this is going to be your sort of extra camera, go for it. I think you'll be very happy with it. And I think you might be a little bit shocked at how close a lot of its performance is to the Z8 and the Z9. But as for me, for work purposes, and probably even just as a carry round as well, an everyday carry, I prefer the more modern styling DSLRs and the latest mirrorless cameras like the Z8 and the Z9. That's just more my thing. Right, anyway, that's enough of that. Take care. See you later. Bye-bye.